In the streets of LA, it isn't just Bloods versus Crips anymore. There's a whole different beast out there, the Hoovers. And they don't care what color you bang. Red or blue, makes no difference. To them, it's Hoovers versus everybody. These dudes are feared, hated, and known to bring smoke to anyone in their way. They don't roll for peace. They ride for power, respect, and revenge. Even other Crip sets don't trust them. Why? Because Hoovers flipped the script. They broke off from the Crips and started calling themselves criminals. And from that moment on, the game changed. This is the story of the most hated gang in LA and why nobody wants problems with them. The set that turned the city on fire. Los Angeles has always been a city of dreams, but for some, it's been a war zone. In the streets of South Central, dreams didn't come easy. You had to fight for respect. You had to protect your name. And in the middle of it all, gangs ruled the blocks. They controlled corners, claimed colors, and settled beefs in the loudest, bloodiest ways possible. Out of all the gangs that made their mark, the Hoover Criminals gang stood out. Not just for their numbers or their territory, but for how they moved. They didn't just go to war with rivals, they went to war with everybody. The Hoovers weren't about peace treaties or alliances. They were about survival, domination, and putting fear in hearts. In LA gang history, their name rings the loudest because they didn't just beef with Bloods. They didn't just bang on Crips, they banged on both. It all started in the 1970s, down on Hoover Street between Vermont and Figueroa. What began as the Hoover Groovers turned into something much more violent and feared. At first they were Crips, but over time things changed. The Hoovers split off and started doing their own thing. The streets started calling them Hoover Criminals, and they earned that title, block by block. What made them different wasn't just the color they wore or the signs they threw up, it was the mindset. Hoovers versus everybody wasn't just a slogan, it was the truth. While most gangs had sets they could call allies, the Hoovers cut those ties. They didn't trust no one. Other gangs started to see them as a threat, even the ones that once stood beside them, and the Hoovers embraced it. That hate, they wore it like a badge. As one street legend once said, they was enemies with everybody, but they didn't care. They liked it that way. That's how deep their hatred ran. For rivals and even for those who weren't on their level. From the 43s to the 112s, every Hoover set held it down in their own zone, but that same energy ran through them all. The streets were watching. And when the Hoovers stepped out, the whole city took notice. Because when it came to gang life in LA, they weren't just in the mix, they were the storm. And their story is just getting started. But to understand the concept of Hoovers and why they went against everybody, we need to trace things back to the origins. And that's where the Crips come in. The rise of the Crips. You see, the Crips didn't just show up out of nowhere. They were born in the streets of Los Angeles in 1969, a time when the city was going through major changes. Jobs were disappearing, neighborhoods were falling apart, and young black men were getting shut out of regular life. No jobs, no clubs, no support. So they built their own thing, on the streets. Raymond Washington and Stanley Tookie Williams were the two names at the center of it all. Raymond repped the east side, and Tookie ran the west. When they came together, they had one goal, to unite all the neighborhood street crews under one name, the Crips. At first, it was about sticking together and pushing back against the chaos around them. But it didn't stay like that for long. They started small, but things picked up fast. Blue rags, blue outfits, and one purpose, power. Crips became a name that struck fear in Los Angeles. It was a fighting alliance, Tookie said in his book, nothing more, nothing less. And from that point on, everything changed. Sets started popping up everywhere. By the late 1970s, they weren't just a crew, they were a full-on army. In the beginning, the Crips wore blue because of a guy named Curtis Buddha Morrow. He rocked blue Levi's, blue shirts, and suspenders. After he got shot in '73, Crip members wore blue to honor him. It became their color, their uniform, their flag. But that unity didn't last long. After Raymond Washington was killed in 1979 and Tookie got locked up for murder the same year, the Crips lost their leadership. Without anyone calling the shots, different Crip sets started turning on each other. It became Crip on Crip beef, rolling 60s versus 8 trays, East Coast Crips versus Hoover Crips. The unity cracked, and all-out war broke loose in South Central. At one point, there were 45 different Crip sets in LA alone, and a lot of them didn't get along. The Hoover Crips were one of those sets. They ended up cutting ties and later became something else entirely, the Hoover Criminals. But before we get to that part, it's important to understand how the Crips became their own own worst enemy. One by one, the old alliances broke. Gangs that once stood side by side were now blasting at each other over colors, corners, and ego. The gangster Crips and the neighborhood Crips became two separate camps, forcing other sets to pick a side, and picking wrong could get you killed. The name Crips has different stories behind it. Some say it started as Cribs because the gang was made up of young kids, barely teens. Others say it came from the way members carried canes and started getting called cripples. Eventually, people shortened it to Crips. By 1972, newspapers were using the word, and by the mid-70s, everybody in the city knew what it meant. Some folks tried to give it deeper meanings, like community revolution in progress. But the original members never claimed that. It wasn't about politics, Tookie said. It was about surviving in the hood. The Crips spread fast. Young people were joining for protection, reputation, or just to belong. Sets were running whole blocks, dealing drugs, pulling robberies, and leaving bodies behind. Some were pushing PCP, weed, even amphetamines. With the power came the violence, and LA became a battlefield. The problem was, too much growth led to too many egos, and without strong leadership, those egos clashed. Washington always wanted to avoid Crip-on-Crip beef, but after his death, there was no stopping it. Every set wanted to be on top, and when one set got disrespected, retaliation was automatic. By 1971, the Crips were outnumbering every other gang in South Central. That power made enemies. Gangs like the LA Brims, Athens Park Boys, and Denver Lanes didn't back down. Then came the Piru Street Boys. At first, they were Crips too, but by 1973, things turned ugly. The Pyrus broke off after catching heat from other Crip sets and decided enough was enough. They linked up with other rivals of the Crips and formed something new, the Bloods. That move started one of the longest and bloodiest gang rivalries in American history, Crips versus Bloods, and the streets never looked the same after that. But even inside the Crips, the war didn't stop. Some of the most brutal fights weren't against the Bloods. They were between Crips themselves. Rollins 60s versus 8 Trey Gangsters. Grape Streets versus PJ Watts. Set after set started beefing, and somewhere in the middle of all that was the Hoovers. The Hoover Crips had enough. The constant drama, the betrayals, the backstabbing, it pushed them to flip the script. In the mid-1990s, they dropped the Crip name and started calling themselves Hoover Criminals. They weren't rolling with nobody, not gangster Crips, not neighborhood Crips, not even other Hoover sets if they didn't fall in line. They became something else, something more dangerous. Hoovers versus everybody wasn't just a saying, it was a way of life. They didn't play sides, they made enemies out of everyone, and they didn't care. From that moment on, the Hoovers would go down as one of the most hated and most feared sets in all of LA. And that hate, that's what kept them alive. Because when the whole city is against you, the only ones you can count on are the ones wearing orange with you. Let's go deeper. Because once the Hoovers broke off, the streets were never the same again. The Hoover story? It all goes back to the streets of South Los Angeles. Before the Hoover Criminals became a name that echoed fear across cities, they were just another group trying to survive in a broken system. The gang started in the 1960s on Hoover Street, right between Vermont Avenue and Figueroa Avenue. Back then, they were called the Hoover Groovers. These weren't rich kids. They didn't have after-school programs or summer camps. What they had was each other, the block, and a need to belong. But even before the Crips existed, the Hoovers were already moving through the streets. Then came the shift. One of the original members of the Hoover Groovers lost his younger brother in a killing. Rumors spread and blame fell heavy on the West Side Crips. Instead of going straight to war, the Hoovers and West Side Crips met up at the St. Andrews Park. After talking it out, they decided someone else was responsible, the Figueroa Boys. The beef didn't stay quiet for long. The leader of the Figueroa Boys got jumped hard at a club in LA, and from there the Hoovers were in it. By the mid-70s, the Hoover Groovers dropped the Groovers part and became the Hoover Crips. It was all about alliances back then. The Hoovers rolled with the West Side Crips, but things on the streets weren't just about friendship. In 1979, a deadly rivalry broke out between the Rollin' 60s and 8 Trey Gangsters. This fight changed the Crip world. Gangs had to pick a side. If you rocked with the Rollin' 60s, you repped the neighborhood Crips, also called Deuce Gangs or 2X. If you sided with the 8 Treys, you were Gangster Crips, known as Treys or 3X. The Hoovers chose the gangster side, so they started banging as Hoover Gangster Crips, but the drama wasn't over. In August 1979, Raymond Washington got murdered in a drive-by. The streets lit up with rumors. The East Side Crips pointed fingers at the Hoovers. That moment kicked off a war between the Hoovers and other Crip sets still loyal to Washington. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. The Hoovers had beef with their own. When the crack era hit the hood in the 1980s, the Hoovers leveled up fast. Money, guns, and power flooded the blocks. The Hoover gangster Crips were in deep. They weren't just another set, they were a name that came with bodies. People on the block said, when shots rang out, you already knew who the cops were gonna blame. And they were usually right. One name that added heat to the Hoovers was Ricky Freeway Ross, a drug kingpin with serious ties to the Hoover sets, like the 52 Hoovers and the 74 Hoover criminals. With him in the mix, the gang started stacking serious bread, but with that power came bloodshed. Crip sets turned on them. The streets got hotter, and by the 1990s, the Hoovers made a decision that shocked the city. They cut the Crip name, done, over. They weren't riding with the Crip card anymore. From that moment forward, they were the Hoover criminals, and they let it be known loud and clear. Their taglines, Ask an EBK, anybody killer, everybody killer. Didn't matter if you banged red or blue. If you weren't Hoover, you were food. Speaking of which, on their turf, walls were tagged with BK for blood killer, CK for Crip killer, and OK for Rollin' O's killer. They weren't holding back. It was all-out war, and they stood alone. That mentality, burning bridges with former allies and sparking beef with both Bloods and Crips, made them the most hated set in LA. Colors, signs, and the code of orange. Hoovers rep a different style. Most Crips wear blue, but after they broke off, the Hoover criminals adopted orange. Their inspiration, the Houston Astros. They started wearing Astros caps with the big H to represent Hoover. Orange became their new identity, though some older sets like the 52 Hoovers still mix blue in. Their hand sign is a thumb tucked between the index and middle fingers to form an H. Simple, sharp, and loud. It wasn't just for show. That H told you what time it was. You were either with them or against them. And in the Hoovers world, there was no in between. Even though they stood solo, the Hoovers still had ties within their own family. Every Hoover set under the criminals' flag had their own lane, but they rolled together when it mattered. That is, until things went left with the Main Street Mafia Crips. Back in 2009, both gangs were at a party together. Something popped off, and just like that, the alliance shattered. Later that month, a young Hoover member, Daquan Allen, only 13 years old and repping 94 Hoover, was walking home from the mall wearing his orange bandana. A Main Street Mafia Crip, Christopher Thomas, rolled up on him and asked, "Where are you from?" Allen responded, 94 Hoover criminal gang. Moments later, he was gunned down. After Allen was killed, the streets went cold and quiet, but only for a minute. The Hoover criminals don't talk, they act. Just 9 days later, on August 25, 2009, gunfire broke out in the heart of Main Street territory. Two Main Street Mafia Crip members, Drayvon James, 29, and Robert Nelson, just 16, were shot dead. Both caught multiple rounds. Police didn't even hesitate. They believed it was the Hoovers, striking back fast, up close, and personal. That wasn't the first war they sparked, and it wouldn't be the last. By the late 1980s and 1990s, the Hoovers had beef with everybody. East Side Crips, Rollin' O's, Gangster Crips, Bloods. Even Hispanic gangs weren't safe. The Hoovers ran with an ask model, just like the Mexican Mafia. No friends, only targets. What made it worse was that they liked it that way. One Hoover said it best, "Ain't no love out here, that's how we move." And even with that much hate aimed at them, they stayed standing, still active, still deep, still dangerous. From the 32 dead-end Hoovers to the 112s Lalos, every set carried the same energy. When you saw orange, you either stepped back or stepped up. Because one thing's for sure, when Hoovers hit the street, it ain't ever quiet. Speaking of which, when the Hoovers declared war on the streets, they didn't hold back. Their list of enemies is long and bloody. Raymond Ave Crips, East Coast Crips, Neighborhood Crips, Rollin' D's, Rollin' 100s, and now even the Main Street Mafia Crips. Anyone could get it. And when the 112 Hoover Criminals gang started beefing with the Denver Lane Bloods, it got so bad that a chunk of 112's own neighborhood got taken over. That's how serious the war was. The 1990s turned into a battlefield. The Hoovers had already flipped from Crips to criminals, and with that came a new mindset. Anybody killer. BK, CK, OK, Blood killer, Crip killer, Rollin' O's killer. They wrote it on walls. They lived it in the streets. Shootings weren't rare, they were expected. The Hoovers earned a name for being one of the most violent sets in all of Los Angeles. If you lived there, raising a family wasn't just tough, it was dangerous. But the violence didn't stop with just Bloods and Crips. The Hoovers even got into it with South Los 13, a Sereno gang known for being racist and ruthless. The Hoovers didn't care. If you weren't with them, you were in the way. And if you were in the way, you better pray you didn't get caught slipping. The streets of South Central LA weren't enough. In the 1980s, the Hoovers started spreading out looking for new turf to run their drug game. But here's the twist. Most Hoovers outside LA still claim Crips, not criminals. The code shifted depending on the location. In Seattle, Portland, Houston, and Oklahoma City, Hoover sets began popping up. One of the biggest was in Seattle. The 74 Hoover Crips were started in the mid-1990s by George Edward Hendricks Jr., better known as OGP Nut. That name carried weight. He built up a crew of 200 to 250 active members. But in 2006, OGP Nut got taken out in a shootout outside a restaurant. The game took another one. In Portland, the Hoovers move heavy. They got the 112s, the 107s, and the 74s all banging under the Hoover name. Just like in LA, their main beef is with the Rollin' 60s neighborhood Crips. Both gangs operate in the same space, and it's a constant back and forth. One fight in 2002 said it all. It started with a dogfight, illegal, bloody, and vicious. Things got out of hand fast. A member of the 60s got shot. Then came the retaliation. A Hoover member and his girl got hit in return. She didn't make it. The war spilled into the nightlife. Outside a Portland club, shots rang out. Over 50 shell casings were found. No one was safe, and no one talked. Now, you see, the Hoover name isn't just in the streets, it made its way to the big screen, too. In 1992, Warner Brothers dropped the film South Central, based on a 1987 novel written by Donald Baker. The story followed OG Bobby Johnson, played by Glenn Plummer, a Hoover Street Deuces member. It wasn't just fiction, it was pulled straight from real-life Hoover history. In Training Day 2001, Denzel Washington played a dirty LA cop moving through the city's darkest corners. Some scenes were filmed right on Hoover Street, a place the gang calls Hoover Block. The camera may have been rolling, but the danger was real. Even in music, the Hoovers left their mark. Rapper Schoolboy Q reps the 52 Hoover Gangster Crips. He's part of Top Dog Entertainment and the group Black Hippie. He rolls with J-Rock, who's tied to the Bounty Hunter Bloods, and Kendrick Lamar, who reps Compton. Different backgrounds, same respect, that's the power of the set. The Portland Hoovers even got featured on Gangland, the History Channel's gritty series. The episode, Everybody Killers, a title that said it all. They didn't need to explain much. Just watching them speak, seeing how they moved, you knew what they were about. Different subsets of Hoovers. You see, not all Hoover sets stayed the same. The 43 Hoover Criminals, also called 4 Trey Hoovers, were among the first. Back in the 1970s, they came up on 43rd Street between Figueroa and Vermont. They started as the Hoover Groovers. When they linked up with Westside Crips and Tookie's crew, they took on the Crip name, but things changed. By the 1990s, they dropped the Crip title and turned criminal. The constant beef with neighborhood Crips pushed them there. Over time, their numbers dropped hard. Now the 43s are mostly quiet, no major activity, but their legacy still lingers. They had no shortage of rivals. Rollin' 40s Crips, Rollin' 30s Harlem Crips, First Street East Coast Crips. Even the 46 NHC and the 48 NHC wanted smoke. The 43s stood their ground for a long time, but LA doesn't wait for anyone. Now, let's talk about the 52 Hoover Gangster Crips. These dudes are different. They still wear blue with their orange, holding on to that Crip identity. They came up on 52nd Street in the 1970s and were over 1,000 members deep by the late 1980s. They're tied to the gangster Crip side of things, not the neighborhood Crips. The 52s and the 74s made big money during the crack era, running drug houses across South Central. Reports say they were pulling in between $500,000 to $1 million a month. That ain't small-time hustle. The 52s also got a strong reach outside LA. They're active in places like Houston, New York, and New Jersey, and they ride with other gangster Crip sets like the Broadway Gangsters and Trouble Gang. The 51, 2 Alliance says it all. 51 Trouble Gang and 2 inches for 52 Hoovers. That bond runs deep. But just like their Hoover brothers, they've got enemies. The 59 East Coast Crips, Rollin' 50s neighborhood Crips, the main streets. They've clashed with the 62 Harvard Park Brims, Rollin' 30s Harlem Crips, Fruittown Brims, and the Rollin' 40s Crips. That's how the Hoovers roll. Deep in loyalty, deeper in war. The 59 Hoover Criminals Gang, the 59 Hoover Criminals Gang, also called the 59 Hoovers, have held it down on the west side of South Los Angeles since the 1970s. Once known as the 59 Hoover Crips, they later turned to the criminals card and made their mark in the game. Their turf is right between the territories of the 52 Hoover Crips and the 74 Hoover Criminals. If you ever see graffiti tagged as H59ver, that's them making it known. Their alliance stays firm with other Hoover sets, but outside that circle, it's all smoke. Their Their main enemies are deep: the 62 East Coast Crips, the 62 Harvard Park Brims, and the Rollin' 40s neighborhood Crips. But it doesn't stop there. The 59 Hoovers beef with every East Coast Crip and all the neighborhood Crips, including the 55 and 57 NHCs. That list ain't just names, it's a record of street battles, losses, and bodies. And the 59s keep their name ringing through the war. The 74 Hoover Criminals Gang. The 74 Hoover Criminals Gang, or 7-Fo, also known as the Bay Bays, came up strong around 74th and Hoover. This set is not only one of the oldest, but also one of the biggest under the Hoover brand. Active for over 3 decades, the 74s built their legacy off hustle, fear, and war. By the 1980s, they were right in the center of South Central's drug explosion. Together with the 52 Hoover Gangster Crips, the 74s were known to be pulling in real money. They ran multiple drug spots across the city, and some reports say they were raking in between $500,000 to $1 million a month. That kind of cash don't come easy, and it don't come clean. The 74s still ride hard with all Hoover sets, along with the Shotgun Crips and Insane Crips, also called the Hussein. But their list of enemies runs just as long. The Rollin' 60s neighborhood Crips and the 76 East Coast Crips are always on their radar. The 74s also go head-to-head with the 79 Mad Swan Bloods and the Menlo Crips. Add in the 84 Main Street Mafia Crips and all Rollin' Zero sets, and the picture gets clear. The Bay Bays didn't just build a name, they built a legacy in warfare. The 83 Hoover Criminals Gang. The 83 Hoover Criminals Gang, also known as 8 Trey Hoovers or the Rascals, have earned a deadly rep. Holding territory around 83rd and Hoover, they're the largest Hoover set and one of the most feared. With over 30 years of heat behind them, they didn't just survive, they dominated. They rule their turf with force, and their enemies know what it means to cross that line. The 83s roll deep with the 74 Hoovers, Shotgun Crips, and 8 Trey Gangster Crips. That last alliance has history. They all hate the Rollin' 60s. That hatred has led to countless shootouts and bloodshed. But the 60s aren't their only enemies. The 83s beef heavy with the Rollin' 90s West Coast Crips, the 98, 97, and 87 Gangster Crips, the 84 Main Street Mafia Crips, and all East Coast Crips. They also got major issues with the 84 Mad Swan Bloods and every single neighborhood Crip set. It's not about numbers, it's about fear, and the 83s got that on lock. Now slide over to the 92 Hoover Criminals Gang, also called the 9 Deuce Hoovers or Doulos. The 92 Hoover Criminals Gang. This crew came up in the 1970s like the others, repping their block on 92nd Street. Smaller in numbers, but loud in presence. Even before flipping to the criminals card, they were one of the most active in South Central. They're tight with every Hoover set, but closest to the 94's Hoovers. Together, they call it Doulos Down. And when they bang together. Their list of enemies includes the Rollin' 90s West Coast Crips, the 87s and 97s Gangster Crips, the 98 Main Street Mafia Crips, and, like most Hoovers, every neighborhood Crip in sight. From H59 Vertags to Doulos Down hand signs, every set carries its own piece of the story, but they all move under the same flag. And when that orange flag is up, the streets already know what it means. The 94 Hoover Criminals Gang. Then there's the 94 Hoover Criminals Gang, also called the 9-Fo or Lowdowns, came up hard on the west side of South Los Angeles. Their turf was set around 94th Street between Vermont and Figueroa. They started in the 1970s as the 94 Hoover Crips, but by the late 1980s and early 1990s, they dropped Crips and turned into Hoover Criminals. With that name, change came a darker reputation. Back then, their name meant one thing: raw violence. They weren't just another set in the mix, they were feared. In 2009, the 9-Fo made headlines. A 13-year-old member named Daquan Allen, known in the streets as 4-Star or Touche, was walking home from the swap meet on Broadway. He was repping his set, rocking an orange bandana, when 21-year-old Christopher Thomas from Main Street Mafia Crips approached him. Thomas asked, "Where are you from?" Daquan stood on it, 94 Hoover Criminal Gang. Moments later, he was shot twice in the chest. He didn't make it. Police said that hit sparked a chain of revenge. According to the 77th Division, that single shooting led to more bodies dropping in both the Southeast and 77th Divisions of LAPD. 2 people died, 3 got wounded, the streets lit up quick. The 94 Hoovers roll tight with all Hoover sets, but their closest family is the 92 Hoovers. Together they go by Doulos Down. Rapper D2CE, tied to the 92s, even dropped a tribute track called Real Homies in honor of Touche. That bond ain't just words, it's war-ready. Their common enemies include the 98 Main Street Mafia Crips, the 87s and 97s Gangster Crips, and of course the East Coast and neighborhood Crips. Same war, same targets, same blood spilled. The 107 Hoover Criminals Gang, known on the street as the Groove Gang or the Celos, go way back. Formed in the 1970s like most Hoover sets, they held down 107th Street between Vermont and Figueroa. They picked the name Groove Gang to keep the memory of the original Hoover Groovers alive. That respect for history runs deep with the 107s. They started off as Crips, like the rest, but flipped to criminals over time. And when they did, they brought serious heat to the streets. The 107s are known for putting in work and standing firm in Hoover tradition. Among all their allies, the closest are the 112s Hoovers. That connection is more than just unity. It's loyalty earned in blood. Their rival list is rough. The underground Crips, Budlong Gangster Crips, and the 104 Hustler Crips are all at the top. But the main enemy that sticks out is the Denver Lane Bloods. The 107s have had bloody wars with the DLBs and the hate runs deep. These beefs aren't petty, they're personal. And when the 107s show up, it's never calm. The 107 Hoovers aren't just local anymore either. They've spread out. Nationwide, the name still means the same thing. Don't mess with Groove Gang, because once they're locked on you, it's not going to be a warning shot. The 112 Hoover Criminals Gang, known as the 11 Deuce or Lalos, also run out of the West Side. Like their 107 brothers, they trace their roots back to the 1970s. And like them, they started as Crips. But that label didn't last. When they switched to criminals, they brought the same fire as every other Hoover set. The 112s and the 107s are close. In one of their most violent feuds against the Denver Lane Bloods, the 107s backed the 112s without question. That level of unity showed other gangs what the Hoovers were really about, family over everything, and when one set gets pressed, the others step up. Their enemies are spread wide. It starts with the Denver Lane Bloods and stretches to the 120 Raymond Avenue Crips and the 112 Neighborhood Crips. It doesn't stop there. The Harvard Gangster Crips, 113 Original Block Crips, Gardena Payback Crips, East Coast Crips, and all Rollin' 100s are all on the list. These are not just rivals. These are street wars that leave chalk outlines and empty shells behind. Even with all that heat, the 112s are still standing. They've been through generations of gang life and haven't backed down. When they throw up their H, it's not just for Hoover. It's for every fight, every funeral, and every brother they've lost. Hoovers versus everybody. The Hoover Criminals are deep in war, not just with Bloods, not just with Crips, but with nearly everyone on the streets. Even though they started out as a Crip gang, they flipped the game. Today they bang hard on both red and blue. One Hoover put it like this: "We ain't with no card. We our own thing now." Their main heat comes from neighborhood Crip gangs, the ones under the 2X card. Rollin' 60s, rollin' 40s, rollin' 100s. Hoover's got history with all of them, but their war with the Denver Lane Bloods and the Crenshaw Mafia Gangster Bloods has been just as deadly. Other blood rivals include the Family Swan Bloods, BJ Smith Park Brims, Van Ness Gangster Brims, and Fruittown Brims. But if you ask the streets the Hoover versus neighborhood Crips beef, that one's personal, that one cuts deeper, and it doesn't stop there. Even Crips who fall under the 3X Gangster Crip card have clashed with them. Gangs like the 87 GC, 97 GC, and the 4-Pack GC have all gone head up with Hoovers. That's why the Hoovers started saying ABK and EBK, anybody killer, everybody killer. They don't care what card you claim. If you're not with them, you might be a target. They've even had problems with Serrano gangs. Gangs like Crazy Riders 13 and Southlaws 13 are on their list. And even though the Hoovers fall under the Gangster Crip brand themselves, they've never been afraid to turn on their own lane. That includes the 87s, 97s, and 4-Pack. At one point, the Hoovers tried something new. A three-way alliance was formed between them, the Innocence Family Gangster Bloods and the 8-Tray Gangster Crips. They called it Movin', Swoopin', and Groovin'. It was short-lived, but for a while it was real. Different colors, same cause. But when certain Hoover sets started claiming Gangster Killer, the bond with 8-Trays got cut off. That partnership ended fast. Still, the Hoovers kept things cool with the Innocence Family Gangster Bloods. That connection caused tension between IFGB and Denver Lane Bloods. Two blood sets now on opposite ends because of who they backed. In Del Perro, the Hoovers got another alliance with the insane Crips. Together, they're known as Hussein. It's one of the few friendships the Hoovers still honor outside their own family. Behind bars, things get even more complicated. Some Hoover members in prison have been friendly with Peru's sets, especially since they've stepped back from riding under the Blood Alliance. In one set, the 52 Hoover Gangster Crips never gave up their Gangster Crip title. They stayed close with sets like 51 Trouble GCs, 52 Broadway GCs, 53 Avalon GCs, and even the 8 Trey GCs. While other Hoovers turned criminal, the 52s stayed gangster. That choice made them stand out. For a while, the Hoovers and Main Street Mafia Crips were allies too. But all that ended after a young 94 Hoover member was shot at a Main Street party. That one incident turned a friendship into a permanent war. The streets still feel the Hoover presence. Today, they dominate the eastern part of Davis. You can spot them by the gear they wear: Houston Astros hats, Detroit Tigers jerseys, Royside threads, and Washington Nationals caps. Their clothes tell you who they are, and if you're from the wrong set, it might be the last thing you notice. Some say they're the most violent crew in Davis, right next to Chamberlain Barrio Tortilla Flats 13. It's not just talk, it's body counts, shootouts, corners stained with history. The active Hoover sets still putting in work today include the 52 Hoover Gangster Crips, 59 Hoover Criminal Gang, 74 Hoover Criminal Gang, 83 Hoover Criminal Gang, 92 Hoover Criminal Gang, and the 94 Hoover Criminal Gang. The older sets like the 32 Dead End Hoovers and 43 Hoovers are now defunct. The 107s and 112s are mostly inactive, but that don't mean the Hoovers are fading. The sets that are still alive carry the weight for all of them. As for enemies, the list is long and bloody. Raymond Avenue Crips, 42, 43, and 48 Gangster Crips, 87 and 97 Gangster Crips, Budlong Gangster Crips, Pimptown Gangster Crips, Playboy Hustler Crips, Menlo Neighborhood Crips, East Coast Neighborhood Crips, Rollin' 30s, Harlem Crips, Rollin' 40s Neighborhood Crips, Rollin' 50s Neighborhood Crips, Rollin' 60s Neighborhood Crips, Rollin' 90s Neighborhood Crips, Rollin' 90s West Coast Crips, Rollin' 100s Neighborhood Crips, Rollin' 100s Block Crips, Main Street Mafia Crips, Grape Street Watts Crips, 103 and 104 Hard Time Hustler Crips, Tongan Crip Gang, Denver Lane Bloods, Fruittown Brims, Family Swan Bloods, Vario Rancho 13, Crazy Riders 13, and South Lost 13. Despite everything stacked against them, the Hoovers keep moving. They don't back down. And in the middle of all the chaos, one thing's clear: the Hoovers ain't out here playing. They're making sure their name stays alive, in ink, in fire, and in fear. They've turned the streets into a battlefield where respect is earned in blood and fear runs deep. And when one of their top soldiers falls, it sends shockwaves through the whole game. The life sentence. Ronald Clayton Rhodes, known in the streets as Big Fly, just got hit with life in federal prison, plus 10 more years. And this ain't just any regular sentence. Rhodes was no small-time player. He was a high-ranking member of the Hoover Criminal Gang in Portland, Oregon, a gang that's been around since the late 1960s, born in Los Angeles and later spreading its roots deep into Portland in the 1980s. The Hoovers built their name through violence, power moves, and staying feared. The gang has always worked under a loose rank system. If you wanted to climb up, you had to earn your stripes with blood and bullets. And Rhodes, he made sure everybody knew he was ready to do what it took. He joined the gang in 2005 and barely saw freedom. 10 out of 11 years he was behind bars. But even when he did touch the streets, he wasted no time making noise. Big Fly was involved in some of the worst acts linked to the Hoovers: a murder, an attempted murder, a home invasion robbery, and pushing dope, all done while still wearing the colors. He didn't just ride with the set, he led from the front, showing younger members like the Lil Flies how real gangsters earn respect. He made violence a rule, not an exception. His name held weight, and not just in Portland. His actions left a message for any Hoover enemy: mess with one, you mess with all. The Hoover Criminal Gang has long called themselves everybody killers. That means Bloods, Crips, Serenos. No set is safe. In Portland, they clashed with several local gangs, and Hoovers didn't wait to be attacked. Any small disrespect, retaliation was expected. That's the code. Violence was loyalty. Loyalty was survival. Rhodes followed that rule by the book. The Fed said the Hoovers ran a criminal enterprise. Murder, drug dealing, robbery, you name it. Every act was another step in building up the gang's reputation. And it wasn't just about getting paid. It was about showing force, power through fear. Rhodes became the example, the one setting the bar for how far a Hoover should go to keep the name alive. Back in 2019, the law finally came swinging hard. A federal grand jury charged Rhodes, along with fellow senior Hoover Lorenzo Lerone Jones and 2 others, with racketeering conspiracy. The charges weren't light: murder tied to gang life, using guns to kill, and carrying weapons during violent crimes. The walls were closing in. When the trial came, it was Rhodes' turn to face everything he put into motion. The feds proved he was involved in the 2015 murder of Kyle Polk, gunned down near a corner store in southeast Portland. That was just one of the many acts stacked against him. The jury found him guilty in 2022. A year later, in 2023, the sentence dropped like a hammer: life in prison. Speaking of which, this wasn't a one-man takedown. The Rhodes case is part of a bigger play, a sweeping investigation into the Hoover criminal gang under the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. The FBI, Portland Police Bureau, Multnomah County Sheriff, and even Homeland Security were all in on it. Local cops teamed up with federal forces to dismantle one of the most feared gangs in the Pacific Northwest. The feds didn't just want Rhodes. He was a big fish, but they were after the whole pond. Other Hoover members have already been sentenced or are facing charges. It's part of the Department of Justice's Project Safe Neighborhoods, a plan to target violent offenders and bring peace to neighborhoods terrorized by gangs. Even inside prison walls, Hoover members kept their set active. Rhodes spent most of his gang years locked up, but that didn't stop his influence. He mentored younger Hoovers, taught them to stay violent, and pushed them to gain respect the same way he did, through fear and force. They followed his path like soldiers. When the bond between gang life and prison gets this strong, breaking that chain takes more than handcuffs. That's why the case of Big Fly hits different. It shows just how deep the gang life can go. Rhodes may be off the streets now, but his legacy in the Hoover set still echoes. Just like the feds said, this wasn't just about one man, it was about pulling apart the engine behind the violence. Rhodes once wore the crown in the Hoover criminal gang. Now he's wearing orange behind bars for life, with no road back. And for those still in the game, his fall is a warning. The same ladder you climb in the streets, it might just lead you straight to a cage, the legacy that won't die. The Hoover Criminals gang didn't just rise, they stamped their presence in Los Angeles history with force. From their roots in the late 1960s to their transformation in the 1990s, they've never stopped evolving. First Crips, then Criminals, and now they're a name that still brings tension to entire blocks, even decades later. Their legacy ain't written in textbooks. It's tagged on walls, whispered in lockups, and feared in the streets. What started on Hoover Street turned into something much bigger. They weren't just another Crip set. The Hoovers broke off, called themselves Criminals, and set fire to both sides. Bloods and Crips. That EBK mindset, short for everybody killer, said everything. To the Hoovers, no one was safe. They didn't care if you wore red, blue, or anything in between. You crossed them, you get handled. Simple as that. But their story isn't just about violence, it's about influence. The Hoover name spread far beyond South Central. Portland, Houston, even the feds had to step in, hitting top members like Big Fly with life sentences. Yet somehow, the set still breathes, still walks, still posts up on street corners. Even when leaders fall, younger soldiers step in, ready to prove they're about that life. Today, the Hoover Criminals remain one of the most hated and most feared gangs in LA. Their color might be orange, but their name is blacklisted in hoods all across the city. Cops know them, other sets avoid them, and the community caught in the middle. Kids grow up with Hoover tags on their bus stops. Mothers hear gunshots and already know who was involved. It's like the war never left. It just changed faces. And with all the lockdowns, indictments, and federal heat, you'd think they'd die out. But the Hoovers don't fade easy. Their name still rings bells in Davis and beyond. Whether it's a hit, a funeral, or just a shout out in a drill song, they stay in rotation. They're not just part of gang culture in LA, they are gang culture. Because when you talk about the most hated, the most feared, and the most active, one name always comes back around: Hoovers. Still here, still deadly, still moving. Do you think the Hoover Criminals gang will ever truly disappear? Or is their name just too deep in the streets to fade? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.